In today's video, I want to discuss about Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham. There are some important questions we need to ask about how he was born and why he was abandoned by his father. I want to ask God why he let things happen the way they did. The story of Ishmael begins in Genesis chapter 16 as a sad and horrific one. Genesis chapter 16 verse 1 to 4. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. I'm reading from New International Version of Bible, which refers Hagar as slave, but King James Version calls her a maid. Anyways, there are two problems with the events that occurred. First, even though it is an ancient tradition for wives to give their maids or slaves to their husbands to sleep with, it is nowhere mentioned whether Hagar had a choice whether she wants to have sex with her 85-year-old master. Just imagine what would have happened to her if she did not agree to sleep with him. She would have probably been killed or abandoned to starve, because that was the way disobedient slaves were dealt with at that time. Now the verse also says that Sarai gave Hagar to Abram to be his wife. According to Jesus in Matthew chapter 19 verse 9, this is the very definition of adultery. I do not understand why God did not stop Abram or Sarai from committing this sin. And this is not a traditional marriage like that of Sarai's. Her intention was to take Hagar's child and raise as her own. She did not want to treat Hagar as one of Abram's wife or mother of a child. Let's read the next verse. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. Of course, Hagar despised her mistress. Why wouldn't she? Sarai only made her Abram's wife to take her child. What kind of mother would not hate the woman who wants to steal her kid? We must notice the evil in Sarai's heart. She complains to her husband that her slave/sister wife is not treating her with respect. Now, Abram's response to Sarai's whining is even horrible. Even though Hagar is his wife, he still called her Sarai's slave and asked her to do whatever she wanted. I mean, what kind of coward cannot stand up to his wife to stop her from ill-treating the mother of his child? By the way, only a monster would harass a pregnant woman. Imagine how bad the harassment should have been that Hagar left Abram's house and fled to the desert. Now, what was God's solution to this bad situation? He did not discipline Sarai for her nefarious plan to steal someone's child. He did not even ask her to stop abusing a pregnant woman. He did not hold Abram accountable for not helping Hagar. Instead, he asked Hagar to go back to her mistress and submit to her. Yes, of course, he also promised Hagar that he will increase her descendants through her son Ishmael. But the same promise also says that Ishmael's hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will be against his. I do not know if this is a blessing or a curse of hostility throughout Ishmael's life. As per God's orders, Hagar went back to her mistress. We do not know whether Sarai continued to abuse Hagar, but I do not think she had any change of heart. In later events, Hagar gave birth to her son Ishmael, and he was circumcised at the age of 13, along with every other man in Abraham's household. In chapter 21, Sarah gives birth to her son Isaac, and that made her very happy. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." By this time, we must conclude that Sarah is an evil woman. Even though Hagar is Abraham's wife, she still called her a slave. And she did not want to give Ishmael any inheritance. On top of that, she wanted to kick Hagar and her son out of the house. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." This part of the scripture really concerns me. Even God called Hagar a slave instead of Abraham's wife. By the way, is this God's justice? Let the father of many nations abandon his oldest son and his wife. I do not know why God let Abraham and Sarah treat Hagar and Ishmael this way. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Wow! Abraham was a very rich man at that time. He had servants, animals, and many riches. But he sent his wife and child with some food and a skin of water. That is all he could spare from his bounty. What can we say about a man's character and his morality when he abandons his wife and child with little to nothing? Did he stop at least once and think what would happen to them in the wilderness? Let's see what happened to them. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. This was the story of Ishmael. His father abandoned him when he was 13 years old and he never gave him any inheritance. While Isaac was growing up with his father comfortably with plenty of food and servants, Ishmael grew up in the desert and became an archer. He never resented his father and even buried him after his death. He never resented God. Instead, he was grateful for the blessing of offspring. Sarah and Abraham should have faced God's judgment for what they did, but they got away. The only lesson I can take away from all of this is sometimes men chosen by God commit sin and horrible injustice, and God will overlook those mistakes if it is in His plan. In the end, Ishmael won. He fought through his hardships and he lived for 137 years. He had 12 sons and all of them became tribal rulers. I guess there is victory in living that long when your father does not consider you an heir, and an evil stepmom who wants you to die, and brothers who will only look at you as son of a slave woman. In the end, God's blessing worked out for Ishmael.